When couples are planning for retirement, whether they're married or not, they need to be aware of a few things, and that's because they face unique risks. Now, in some ways, couples have an advantage over singles, and that's because they might have several Social Security payments coming into the household. Maybe each person brings assets to the table, and they only need to pay for one house. However, there are some challenges that are unique to couples, and these are the things that my clients find most surprising as we go through their plans. So we're going to talk about what those challenges are, why they're so important, and what you can do about it as you plan for your retirement. The first thing to look at is, what if one of you dies unexpectedly early? Again, you might have two Social Security payments or two pensions coming into the household, maybe both. And if one of you dies, then your income gets cut in half. Unfortunately, the expenses don't necessarily get cut in half. So yes, you might spend less on groceries, vacations might cost less, you might buy fewer tickets, but the reality is most of your costs are going to stay about the same. So the question becomes, can the other person live with a few $1,000s less per month? Or will that be a problem? It's certainly smart to plan for longevity. For example, you might want to assume that both of you live into your 90s. That way, you can improve the chances that you have the assets to provide the income you need all through those decades. But you also want to look at what happens if somebody dies early. So the way to do that is start by doing your plan with longevity. Both of you live a nice long life. We're hoping for the best. But then you can start doing some what if scenarios and fiddle with the numbers. So for example, you might say, what if you live until age 60 or 70 or 80 while the other person lives to be 95 or 92 or whatever it is? Then flip-flop everything and assume that you're going to live into your 90s, but the other person dies at age 60, then try age 70, then try age 80, etc. By going through that exercise, you might find some critical points. So at a certain age, everything might be okay if both of you make it to that age. But you may discover that there is a point where one or both of you are at risk. It just depends on the details of your situation. Maybe it matters more if one person dies early, but if the other person goes early, it isn't as disastrous for the survivor. Then, once you know what you're working with, you can look at ways to improve your chances of success and make things easier on whoever is the survivor. So obviously you could retire later. That means you'd have more resources, but that also means fewer years of not working before death. You'd want to look at Social Security and say, what are we doing to maximize the benefit for the survivor just in case somebody goes early? And then you could also look at things like an inexpensive life insurance policy. For example, if you just need 10 or 20 years, you could potentially look at a small policy, might not cost that much, that could help fill the gap just in case something happens. It's also important to consider those pensions, especially as you make those decisions at retirement. For example, a pension might pay a 100% survivor benefit to the other person, or maybe 50% or nothing. So it might be tempting to take the biggest payment, but that might not have any survivor benefit, which could leave somebody vulnerable. You can also evaluate your home equity. So if somebody dies, the survivor might not want to stay in the same home. Maybe there are memories there and they just don't want to be there, or maybe the house is too much for them, too much for one person, so they might want to downsize and they could potentially get cash out. There's also the potential for a reverse mortgage, which could give you extra assets or monthly income. By the way, I'm Justin Pritchard, and I help people plan for retirement and invest for the future. And in the description below, you'll find some more general retirement planning information. It's not just about what happens if somebody dies, but it's bigger picture stuff. And I think you'll find that really helpful. This is also a good time for a friendly reminder. It's just a short video. We're not covering everything here, so you really need to speak with an expert before you make big decisions on any of these topics. Next, we've got the topic of complicated finances. So in many couples, there's one person who's, let's call them the enthusiast, and the other person who is uninterested in these financial matters. They're certainly interested. It's important. They're smart enough to figure all of it out, but they just generally spend their time doing other things. And in some of these households, the enthusiast spends a lot of time managing the finances. That might mean reading books and watching endless boring videos on YouTube. They might be building gargantuan spreadsheets. They might be trading stocks and other investments actively, and that might require ongoing maintenance and constant attention. And so the question becomes, what happens if that financial manager dies and the other person is suddenly left with everything on their plate? Will they know what to do? And especially at a time when it's really emotionally and cognitively difficult to do these things. The answer is, of course, it depends on how complicated things really are. So it's time for you to start thinking about these things, especially if you are that financial manager in the household. So you might want to consider just keeping a handful of accounts and maybe only using a handful of vendors so that it's easier for the survivor to wrap their head around whatever it is that you've got. It's also a great idea to do some household training or general reviews. Just go through what you have as assets and income and resources and expenses so that the other person knows what's going on and they're not trying to figure it out at the worst possible time. And you can even make this easier by creating an in case of emergency folder, which could be a digital or a physical folder with a listing of what accounts you have and other essential tips on how to manage the household finances. If the other person is really uninterested or they're letting you know that they just don't get it, then it might be worth leaving some names of trusted advisors in that folder. In that way, they can contact a financial advisor or an accountant or an attorney to help them get through all of this so that they don't have to do it all themselves. Ultimately, the important thing is to listen to whoever might be the survivor. And if they're saying they're really overwhelmed and they're not sure what exactly you're showing them, then that means there could be a problem down the road, and it's really a good idea to address that while you can. A third potential issue is that the survivor might have a much higher income in retirement after somebody dies. So you can imagine that maybe there's a married couple or even an unmarried couple where you're leaving assets to each other. Well, the survivor might end up with everybody's pre-tax assets and everybody's income just in their own name. So they inherit these pre-tax IRAs and they have to take required minimum distributions or RMDs later in life. And all of that goes on a single filing tax return. That can potentially create some problems. Some people refer to this as the so-called widow's tax trap. So they will have a higher income than anticipated, all on a single tax return, and that can affect their Medicare premiums. It can affect the tax brackets they're in, how much of their Social Security is included in their taxes, and a number of other things. If you foresee that causing problems, there are a couple of approaches you can look at to potentially address the issue. It might or might not be something you can do much about, but it's worth looking at least Roth conversions. That's where you take pre-tax money and intentionally pay taxes on it, converting it over to Roth type accounts. And then ideally, the money comes out tax-free later, assuming the survivor meets all of the IRS requirements. So you can do chunks of Roth conversions or partial Roth conversions over a series of years, or you can just start spending down those pre-tax accounts, not even converting it, but just drawing from those accounts for your spending, even if you don't need the money. And that way you get a head start on those RMDs. If you do any charitable giving, or if the survivor does, you may want to look into QCDs or qualified charitable distributions, where you give money directly from an IRA to the tax qualified charity. And there are a number of other strategies you can look at. So you can solve this problem and some of the other problems we talked about in a variety of different ways. And I hope this has been good food for thought. If it's been helpful, please leave a quick thumbs up. Thank you and take care.